Join us in today's conversation with Barbra Lamb, a longtime psychotherapist, as we explore her viewpoint on close encounters.
Oh, by the way, in my work as a therapist, I do a lot of regression therapy, and I do regressions with people who've had encounters with extraterrestrial beings, if that's what they would like help with. And so people started coming to me, people who had heard those lectures. And anyway, it has amounted to a few thousand people now whom I have regressed to their extraterrestrial experiences. Very often, they have been very disturbed by these visits. No awe and wonder. They've been very disturbed, very frightened, traumatized in some cases. It's really affected their lives. But when we look into it and do the regressions moment by moment as it had actually happened, is what our understanding is, that the regression is actually bringing out the true material of what really happened, then the beings or the people usually realize that the beings had been in one way or another very, very helpful.
All of the abductions potentially, but it sounds like I'm wrong, happen at nighttime. I was really interested to ask you if anything happens in the day, and you did sort of mention that sometimes they do. So are these people taking naps in the day? Are they awake? Like, I really want to get more information about that. Like, is there a conscious, like, has somebody been in the room in the day, fully awake, and then, something happens? Or is it always like around the sleepy time hours?
Oh, no, very often they do happen in the day. And suddenly, everybody was frozen. That means whatever they were about to do, they just stopped. So they're about to drink some beer. They were just frozen in that position. And then another wonderful thing about this process, too, is that I have found during the years of doing these regressions that it's possible to get the beings actually talking to the person who's been taken for that experience. So that opened up my whole awareness that there are people here who must at least have considerable amount of extraterrestrial genetics in them. In other words, ET human hybrids who are living here as humans.
When the walk-in spirit comes in, does it have access to the life experiences and memories of the previous person?
Good question. Oh, you had asked a while ago if I'd had any direct experience with the beings, and yes, I had one show up in my living room one afternoon several years ago.
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
Now that the phenomena of UAP/UFOs has been confirmed as a genuine, real, substantiated phenomenon, how soon until the phenomena of experiencer is confirmed as true and accurate?
Welcome, one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is Universal Disclosure, meeting the moment. My name is Mike, an active UFO/UAP field investigator in Southern California, with my friend and co-host,
Reverend Stu in Melbourne, Australia.
Reverend Stu, that's a really great question, and we're going to explore a little bit of that right now.
Fantastic. I'm very interested in this topic, Mike.
Yeah, I feel like it's time for us to go there. Because in our last season, as it were, we put out a very, very good, compelling case of the nuts and bolts. We touched upon the esoteric. We did focus on the spirituality, as we will continue to do, because that is a common interest of both of ours. But we're also noticing in our own personal investigating of this topic that there's definitely a non-physical nature and there's a spiritual element, not to say religious element. That's a very different thing, but pretty much all of our guests agree as well, and they're all very prominent people. And we're going to speak with yet another very prominent woman, Miss Barbara Lamb. And she is a longtime psychotherapist, having been licensed in 1976, and a highly trained hypnotherapist and regression therapist since 1984. She had 5 years of training in regression therapy by the International Association for Regression Research and Therapies, and became a trainer for that organization, as well as for the Professional Institute of Regression Therapy and the International Board of Regression Therapists. In 1991, she began regressing people to the details of their extraterrestrial encounters and has regressed well over 2,000 people in over 4,000 regressions to those and other paranormal experiences. This work and past life therapy and her soul guidance work still continues today, with sessions performed in person in San Diego, California, or on Skype or Zoom. Barbara is also a UFO expert and crop circle researcher, in addition to being an author.
Wow, now this lady brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to our show. I'm very grateful that she's here today, Mike.
As am I. So let's get right down to it. Universal Disclosure Podcast proudly welcomes Miss Barbara Lamb. Okay, Barbara, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and visiting with us today, and we're excited to talk with you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you because you're a very thinking gentleman, ponderous thinking, and I really like that.
That's wonderful to hear. We're asking some of the tough questions for sure. Reverend Stu and I have been doing this for about a year now, and we're trying to weave in some of the non-physical and esoteric nature of the nuts and bolts phenomenon of UFOs, now called UAPs. But just to sort of get right down into it, what sparked your interest in UFOs, and also to help people who've experienced, non-human intelligence?
Well, I think it started way back in about 1970s, when I was already a licensed psychotherapist and, pursuing very human-oriented work. But I've always had lifelong spiritual wonderings. And in 1997, I think it was, somebody gave me a copy of the book, The Little Prince. And that was about a little guy, sort of looking like a little boy, who came to Earth from a tiny little planet out there in space. And he happened to land in the desert, probably the Sahara. And there was a Frenchman a pilot who had flown a very small plane, and it had crashed in that desert. So the two of them met and spent quite a bit of time together and developed a very, very deep friendship. And I thought, back in 1997, never having heard of extraterrestrial beings or life anywhere else in the cosmos at that point, I was very, very touched. Deeply moved, to the extent that I cried with that sense of profundity and blessing and wonder, about the possibility of some other life out there coming here and even becoming very, very dear, special friends. So I was extremely moved by that. And then a bit later, I saw the movie Close Encounters and was extremely moved by seeing the beings coming off that UFO at the end of that movie, and a couple of different types of beings, and also humans who had been returned from what I later, many years later, learned was a real happening, Project Serpo, of some of our people going to live on planet Serpo for 10 years. But anyway, I was very moved by that film, and still not really thinking that there was such a thing as UFOs or extraterrestrials. And then I began having training for 5 years in past life regression therapy. And that was very, wonderful and thrilling for me. And I had many regressions done on me to a number of my past lives, probably 40 or 50 of my past lives over a period of a few years of regressions. And I learned to regress other people, did a lot of past life therapy along with my regular psychotherapy practice. And then at the end of that training, the trainer woman said to us who were being trained, said, those of you who are doing regression therapy need to know, if you don't already know, that some people have the complaint that they've been visited by very, very unusual beings who are not human. They're not animal and they're not human. They certainly seem to be from somewhere else. And sometimes they have been very confused by that and sometimes even traumatized by that. So that's just something you need to know, as being regression therapists. So I was absolutely amazed and stunned to hear that because I did not know anything about that before. But even more remarkable was that right after she said that, I heard a very loud voice in my own head, not my voice for sure, saying very emphatically, pay attention to this, Barbara. You will be doing this. Whoa. So I just was absolutely amazed. And when I look back on it, I think, why didn't I talk to that trainer more? I was probably with her for another 4 or 5 days and never mentioned it again, nor did she, nor did anybody else. But that got me really thinking that, there must be reality to this. There must be these other beings in the cosmos, and some of them may come and visit people here on Earth. And it certainly makes a big impression on them, for better or for worse. And so I was wondering about that and just found myself, without having consciously set out to do it, I found myself going to bookstores and magazine stores and anywhere where I could possibly find any information about this. So this was in 1988 when this started for me. And there really wasn't much in print about it, but I just looked for anything I could find and went to a lot of used bookstores to see if there was any information about UFOs. I was mostly interested in the personal part of it, the visits with the beings, but boy, I'll tell you, I was just exploring any possible way or means of knowing anything about this. And then, so about 3 years later, in 1991, one day in the shower, which is a good thinking time for me, not interrupted by anything. And I was just thinking, if somebody ever comes to me because they've had these visitors that they don't understand, I think, I think I could handle that because by that time I had been doing several years of regression work, mostly to past lives, but not anything to do with extraterrestrials. But I felt very confident in helping people with that kind of work when they wanted it. And so I decided right there that day in the shower that, if anybody ever comes to me for having been visited by these unusual beings, I could manage that. I could use the same methods, the same techniques, and just direct it toward whatever experiences they're wondering about in this life. So, beautiful synchronicity, one of the biggest ones in my whole life. About 2 hours later, after having those thoughts, I was in a metaphysical bookstore, and the woman behind the counter recognized me as somebody who was doing regression therapy and asked if I would work with her daughter, who was having these visits with unusual beings and was extremely traumatized. She really couldn't function anymore in her college work and her part-time job. So anyway, I agreed to work with her, and that turned out to be very helpful, very fruitful. And then I became convinced, because of doing the regression work with her, that there really are these beings who come. And she had a whole variety of different types of beings that would come on different occasions. And she had been healed right there in her bed when she had a bad ear infection on one occasion. And she just woke up enough to realize that there were three very tall, very white, thin beings with long, thin fingers who were tampering in her ear, the one that was infected. And then she went on back to sleep or was put out of conscious awareness. But in the next morning, when she woke up, she realized that her ear was completely healed, and it never did.
Wow.
That infection never did return again. And then she'd been healed once when driving her car with her sister, who was a witness. It's always great to have a witness. And a blue beam had come in through the back window of the car. This was a daytime event. And the car motor started to sort of peter out. And she pulled off the road, and the two girls got out of the car and ran across the field that happened to be there, because they just didn't know what this blue beam of light was. And the blue beam of light followed my client and hit her in her lower back, where she'd been having a couple of years of pretty severe back pain. And it felt so good, that this beam and the heat coming from it. And so she stopped running. Her sister kept running, but she didn't. She just stopped there in the field, standing upright, and just received this wonderful energy. And very soon just realized that she had no more pain in her back. So the two girls got together and got back in the car and drove off and finished whatever they had set out to be doing. So these reports were very positive, even though she had been so terrified of the being showing up in her room, particularly at night, sometimes in the daytime. And so I realized that this really is helpful work. And if anybody else should happen to want to come to me for this sort of complaint, I really feel confident now in being able to be helpful to them. Well, it wasn't too long after that another woman was referred to me, and another, and another, and another. So I think in 1991, there were about 5 different people. They all happened to be women who were needing help with the extraterrestrial visits that they had had. And I, gained more and more confidence in working with them. And then somehow, I never set out to do this, but I started being invited to speak at certain conferences, like the MUFON groups in Southern California in particular. And at the end of talking about my subject, which sometimes was about extraterrestrials, sometimes it was about crop circles, because I was going to England every summer to research the crop circles that were happening there. But at the end of each lecture, I would just very briefly mention that, oh, by the way, in my work as a therapist, I do a lot of regression therapy, and I do regressions with people who've had encounters with extraterrestrial beings, if that's what they would like help with. And so people started coming to me, people who had heard those lectures. And anyway, it has amounted to a few thousand people now whom I have regressed to their extraterrestrial experiences. So that's what brought me into it. And so you see, there was sort of a predisposition to thinking favorably about the possibility that there could be other life in the universe and that somehow it could get together with us because of the Little Prince starting it all. And I think the fact that in 1977 or so, when I read The Little Prince and cried for 6 hours straight, my children and my husband would think, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Nothing's the matter. I'm just so inspired. I'm so deeply moved." And then a few years later, I saw the movie, The Little Prince, with my son, who was in college at the time. And he said, "Do you think you're going to be all right, Mom? I mean, I remember how you cried so such a long time after reading that little book." Anyway, we went to see the movie, The Little Prince, and he kept looking over at me. It was so cute. And to say, "How are you doing, Mom?" And I was dry-eyed and, just perfectly fine. But until the end, when the Little Prince said to the French pilot, his dear friend, he said, "I'm going to be leaving now. And any time that you look up at the night sky and you see one star, especially twinkling, that's me thinking of you." Well,
Wow.
and I was so moved by that, even though I had heard it a few years before, that I started crying again. And again, I cried for about 5 hours straight with awe, wonderful, blessing, inspiration, gratitude, all of that, that there could be life out there that can connect in a deep way, a profound way with some of us here on Earth. And then, of course, when I realized that this is really true, people are really having these experiences, that really put it all together for me. So I do have to say, however, that so many people who experience these contacts and people who come to me because of that, um, very often they have been very disturbed by these visits. No awe and wonder. They've been very disturbed, very frightened, traumatized in some cases. It's really affected their lives. And but when we look into it and do the regressions moment by moment as it had actually happened, is what our understanding is, that the regression is actually bringing out the true material of what really happened, then the beings or the people usually realize that the beings had been in one way or another very, very helpful to them. For instance, many people discover in their regressions that on board the craft with the beings lying on a hard, cold medical type table, which is a very unpleasant experience in itself, but that they are actually healed of quite a number of maladies going on in their bodies. So there have been many, many, many healings that I have known about, and other people who do this type of work too have known that the beings do a lot of healing. And so when the people realize that even though the beings look very different to us and very strange from our human point of view, and they don't just sit down and chat with us, they usually don't explain what they're doing, they just go ahead and do it. But it turns out that in so many cases, the healings have happened. And I mean healings of really serious problems like impending kidney failure or liver failure or heart failure or blood disorders, cancer. I mean, all kinds of very serious maladies that we humans can have, sometimes more trivial things too, but still we're glad to have them healed. So when people realize that and actually talk to the beings, I assist them in talking to the beings in these sessions. Um, then they realize, oh, this is so different than what I had been fearing. I mean, these beings look so different. They don't act all warm and fuzzy and emotional the way that so many of us do, but they're doing wonderful, wonderful things for us. So over the years, I've had my mind opened up more and more and more to the whole gamut of things that are happening with these beings, including mostly very benevolent things that are happening from them. So here we are years later, uh, with a different perspective about this whole phenomenon. Yeah. Would you like
Okay, wow.
to?
So many questions already. You said something in there that I really want to delve into a little bit because I investigate the nuts and bolts aspect. I only have very limited communications, as it were, with experiencers. So I want to know from someone like yourself, from my perspective, all of the abductions potentially, but it sounds like I'm wrong, happen at nighttime. I was really interested to ask you if anything happens in the day, and you did sort of mention that sometimes they do. So are these people taking naps in the day? Are they awake? Like, I really want to get more information about that. Like, is there a conscious, like, has somebody been in the room in the day, fully awake, and then something happens, or is it always like around the sleepy time hours?
Oh, no, very often they do happen in the day. Maybe most of them tend to happen
Oh,
at nighttime, but many do happen in the day. And so a person could be by himself or herself, and suddenly, whatever the person is doing, suddenly they're aware that they're not alone, that there's somebody else with them. And it's a very unusual someone else, one of these beings from space. And the experience begins then. Now, it's notable, and I think quite amazing, that very often an experience will happen for one person when that person is with a group of people. For instance, one of the early cases, or early in my work cases, was a young woman, a college student, and uh, she was with a group of people, kind of late afternoon, in a home, and they were having a party. So they were drinking beer and smoking cigarettes and nibbling on things, and but it was daylight, and suddenly everybody was frozen. That means whatever they were about to do, they just stopped. So they're about to drink some beer. They were just frozen in that position. And then in from the front door came three little beings, went over to one of the young women in that party and escorted her out of the house and into a spaceship. And they had a whole experience for a couple of hours with everybody being frozen with what they had been just about to do. And then when they brought the young woman back again and sat her down on the sofa where she had been taken from, and then that spell was off, the beings disappeared, and then immediately everybody could continue to do what they had started to do. And after a while, people began to realize, oh, it's dark already. I did why is it dark? And they began to realize that a couple of hours of time had elapsed, and without any awareness of any of them, including the young woman who had been taken, no awareness at all of those beings having come and done that. And that's happened another time that I was aware of with a man in an insurance office, one of those big offices in New York City, where there's a great, huge room and lots of cubicles in which each person worked. And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, suddenly everybody was frozen, and beings came up through the elevator into this big office room, came over to the man in question and took him out. It seemed like they went out through the elevator, but on into a spaceship somehow. And everybody was frozen for that 2 hours. And then when they brought the man back and put him back in his chair and desk at his cubicle, then everybody started sort of coming back into consciousness and moving. And gradually, one person after the other said, "Wow, how did the afternoon go so quickly? How could it be 5 o'clock? Last time I looked at my watch, it was 3 o'clock." And gradually, more and more people began to talk to each other. What do you think just happened? I mean, the time just suddenly went so quickly. We seem to have missed a couple of hours. So those episodes of missing time are very significant because, especially when there are witnesses like that, witnesses that they don't know what happened, but something unusual had happened. And it really turned out that it was one of these extraterrestrial encounters. So that I know cases too where that's happened with a woman I worked with who had been at a beach party by the ocean, a great big beach, big, long, long, long beach. And she was right with the party, with their little beach chairs and blankets and so forth. And suddenly she had a very urgent inspiration to leave the beach party and walk by herself way down to the other end of the beach, which she did. In other words, she had been influenced by the beings, but nobody realized it at that point. So when she was significantly far away, then a small craft came and picked her up and took her for an hour and a half or so for her experience. So yes, a lot of these encounters do happen during the day, and it doesn't seem to matter where the person is, because these lucid beings have that way of just making other people not aware at all. And then time passes and they sort of come to and realize, whoa, where did the time go? Without any clue, any hint that something of this nature had occurred. So many, many people, you see, have experiences with these other beings that they don't know anything about. And that means that sometimes when I'm doing a regression with a person to whatever he or she had been wondering about, maybe there was an experience where they had a glimpse for a second or two of other beings being right there with them, or maybe they are aware that they had missing time and they wonder what happened during that missing time. I think it's a wonderful thing that we are able to go back because of hypnotic regression and find out the details of those experiences. So one might think, okay, during regression, maybe the person is making up this whole scenario. But I do check with the people I regress and say, after the regression is completed and the person is back to regular consciousness, I say, how real or not real do you think that was, all that came up in the regression? And invariably they say, oh yeah, it was real. There's no way I could have made that up. That really happened. Another wonderful thing about this process too is that I have found during the years of doing these regressions that it's possible to get the beings actually talking to the person who's been taken for that experience. In other words, very typically, And this sort of came up spontaneously one time when I was working. The person was being medically examined, it seemed like, on board an unusual room, which was curved and usually very white and lots of light in it. And then these unusual beings standing around the table that they're lying on. And they are aware that they're being examined and sort of poked and probed, and maybe skin samples, hair samples, etc., are being taken from them. And so I stumbled at one time years ago and saying, "Would you like to know what they're doing to you?" Because I was wondering and assumed that the person might be wondering too. And the person would say, "Yes, yes, I would like to know." So I said, "Well, you can ask them right now. You can ask them in your mind because they will know what you're thinking, or you can ask out loud with your words." So some people ask in their minds and some people ask out loud. And then almost immediately, they get an answer from one of the beings. For instance, the being might say, "Well, we're checking your whole body, we're checking different organ systems to really find out how you are physically doing, or if there's anything that needs to be correcting. And we have discovered that there is a problem with your liver." I'm just using that as one example that has happened many times. And so we know that there's a problem with your liver, and we know what it is and what causes it, and we're going to go right ahead and heal it. So then they will very often use various applications of light. The person lying there is aware that, oh, suddenly the light has really intensified all over them and around them, or it's coming more in the form of a roller of light, like a rolling pin of light rolling up through the torso. Or in some cases, it seems like a very long flashlight type of equipment with bright light emitting from that equipment. And anyway, there are various forms of light that seem to be used by different types of beings. And it always feels good. It feels like, ah, there's a different energy about it, a different warmth about that light. And they just know that they're really being helped, even though this is very odd to them. And then in some cases, the beings will say in response to, "What are you doing and why?" Um, they will say, "Well, we have detected a problem, let's say, with your pancreas, and we strongly urge you, when you have returned to Earth, we strongly urge you to go to your doctor and tell him to do a special examination of your pancreas because we know there's a problem there." So either the beings will go ahead and heal what they have detected, or at least warn the person to go ahead and have that healed on Earth. So when the person lying there experiencing these things realizes that, it really makes a difference. So whatever poking and probing and so forth has been going on now has meaning. It makes sense, and they realize it is of benefit to them. So I think in the popular culture about ETs and abductions, many people complain about the anal exam, proctological exam. And so a few of my clients through the years have asked about that. Why are you doing that? And they're always told, well, through this particular exam, which we call a proctological exam, which we humans do not enjoy, that's for sure, that this particular exam gives us more information about your entire human body than all of the other exams we could do put together. And we want to know how your body is doing and to fix it in one way or another if there is something amiss. So, in hearing things like this from the beings, it certainly inspired me to think that, there really is a benevolent aspect to this, no matter what it seems like to the person who's experiencing this. And then that opened up through the years into knowing that there are many, many benevolent aspects to these visits, which might seem so horrible because we don't know enough about them and they're so strange to us. So there's been a big spiritual expansion in my awareness and in my clients, from some of the discussions with the beings. And another thing that has been fascinating to me that I never would have expected was that sometimes when I am conducting a regression and I've encouraged the person to open up conversation with the beings about what the beings are doing, as I have just mentioned, that sometimes when that conversation is going back and forth between them, the beings, and the client, that then the beings will turn their attention to me, the one who's conducting the regression.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how this works, I just cannot explain, because we are doing a regression to a past event. As we understand time, we think in terms of linear time, and there are many indications that that is not correct and that all time is simultaneous. I'm beginning to more and more really explore that idea and even beginning to trust that a bit. But anyway, the beings will, in a past regression, might have been 2 weeks ago, the event happened, it might be 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ago. But anyway, the beings, after talking to my client, will turn their attention to me. And they've always so far used my first name, Barbra. I mean, as if they know me somehow and I have not known them. But I always am particularly interested in this. And then they will comment. One of the most typical comments is that they appreciate that I am letting more and more people on Earth know that these beings exist, and to try to give some perspective on these visits that happen. And of course, the perspective comes entirely from the regressions I do. And then sometimes they'll talk about something else. And this has absolutely amazed me. On one occasion, they talked about a crop circle that I had visited a few years earlier and that I had been absolutely amazed at, because this particular crop circle had a new feature which we had never seen in crop circles before, that a portion of the crop in a swirled circle area seemed to be almost like formed into a sculpture of a nest. And they pointed out that they were amazed at my amazement being in that one particular crop circle. This is several years ago now, and pointing out to my companions, my human companions, uh, about these nests, this new feature we had never seen before in a crop circle, and how enthused we were, how fascinated we were with that. So at that point, I said, it sounds like you were right there with us in that field in England, in that crop circle. Were you there? And the being said, no, no, I've never been on Earth, but I know this remotely. I know many things about Earth and about humans and all life on Earth, but I know it remotely from my own planet, which in that particular case was the binary star system, which we call Antares, where that particular being resided. But anyway, it's been a notable thing, a wonderful thing for me, to think that, or to know that conversation can happen between some of those beings and some of us. And of course, there are many people who do channeling of these beings, which I very much respect. I do not do that myself. It's just one of those abilities I have not developed. But I'm very, very interested in the material that other people bring through from some of these extraterrestrial beings. And sometimes the information is coming from what we would consider more spiritual beings. But more and more is opening up between us. And along the way, during this practice since 1991, I learned about the ET human hybrids, learned a lot about that from various people I was doing regression work with. And then around 2010, I met somebody at a UFO conference, the International UFO Congress. I just turned and there was a woman right next to me, and I looked at her eyes and I thought, oh, and she said, what? Why are you looking at me like that? And I said, well, I hope you don't mind my saying this, but you remind me of a hybrid. And this woman said, yes, I am a hybrid. Anyway, I got to know her. That was a wonderful, wonderful woman named Cynthia Crawford, who is no longer with us now, but she was doing wonderful work. I got to know her very, very well. And then a couple of years later, I met another woman at the International UFO Congress, and immediately I thought of a mantis extraterrestrial being. And so she was brought over to meet me by somebody I did know. And I said, oh, you remind me of a mantis being. And she said, good for you. I am a mantis being. In other words, a mantis hybrid human, ET human hybrid. And I got to know her very well. In fact, she stayed at my home with me from across the country, stayed for about 5 days. And so I got to know her very, very well. And the longer I was with her, the more I was totally convinced, without her having to say anything about it, that she was part mantis beings. So that opened up my whole awareness that there are people here who must at least have considerable amount of extraterrestrial genetics in them. In other words, ET human hybrids who were living here as humans. And then I became invited, as synchronicity has it, once you get interested in something, these resources just come to you. And so one of them was that I was invited to go to well, I suppose what you'd call a house party, sort of a seminar in a home, um, with several other people were there who were hybrids. So I got to know probably about 8 different hybrids then. And then a few months later, there was another gathering of hybrids, and I was invited to that, thankfully, and went, and there were even a couple of different hybrids there. So these seemed like perfectly normal human beings, looked like human beings, but it became evident quite quickly that many of them had unusual abilities that most of us don't have, that they had a whole range of psychic abilities, and they had healing ability, and they could do telepathy. They were doing telepathy with each other right there in front of me. And how exciting. And yet they were functioning and living, fully as human beings. So my interest in that kept growing and stretching. And then, just a week or so after that second gathering, there was a man from England, Miguel Mendonça, who started emailing me. Now, I don't know how he knew about me, but he did. I'm so pleased. And he said, I understand that you are meeting some hybrids and getting to know them, and I'm very interested in the few hybrids I know here in England. And anyway, we started corresponding and decided to write a book together, which turned out to be the book Meet the Hybrids, The Lives and Missions of ET Ambassadors on Earth. So we interviewed 8 people for that book, long interviews, and then a second interview and a third interview of each one of them, about their lives and their abilities and the species that they had the genetics from, of a variety of extraterrestrial beings. So that really opened up things to me vastly. I had already given a lecture at the MUFON Symposium in 2010, I believe it was, maybe 2011, talking about the hybrids who are not nearly human enough to be able to live on Earth. They live on the spaceships or on other planets. And at that time, I had met these 2 women I have mentioned to you, who are hybrids living on Earth. But then since then, that whole subject has opened up greatly for me. And I think it's wonderful that we have these people on Earth who have the genetics of 2 or 3, 4 or 5 or 6, in one cases, different species in them, and that they're here totally for helping humanity, to basically raise the consciousness of humanity and to educate other people about the existence of other very intelligent life in space, all over space. So I have been very gratified to know these people and to know that there's this very benevolent process or program going on for these hybrids to live here among humans as a human, and they are born here, and to live their whole lives in service to people wherever they can. So, these things just keep opening up. And then, as time has gone on, also, some of these things happen kind of concurrently. I've been aware of walk-ins. So a walk-in is actually where a soul from an extraterrestrial realm, or in some cases from a spiritual realm, that soul will want to come to Earth to give benevolent service. And that soul doesn't want to have to go through incarnating the way that we all do, and being gestated in a womb, and then be a baby, and then a toddler, and then a teenager, an adult, and all of those years spent before really getting to their service. So they kind of take a shortcut in the sense that that soul that wants to come to Earth and be of help here, that soul will look around for the soul of a person living here who doesn't want to be here anymore. And that person is not necessarily going to commit suicide, but is just living with not wanting to be here anymore for a variety of reasons. And so those two souls get together and make an agreement. This is absolutely mutually agreed upon, that at a certain time, the incoming soul will meet with the soul of the person who doesn't want to be here anymore, and they do an exchange. In other words, the soul of the person living here will leave at the same time, the same moment that the incoming soul wants to come and live in that body in order to be here and to do the work that that soul would like to do here. So that is a very brief explanation of a walk-in. So in the meantime, the soul that has left the body, in a sense, given it over to this other soul to live in, continue life in, that soul, the leaving soul, will go on into the spirit realm where we all go after we die. So that soul is perfectly fine and can reincarnate again whenever that soul wishes to. And in the meantime, the new soul coming in gets a whole body, a whole life situation to live in, to ground them into being here so that they can do the service that they have come to do. So I think that's a wonderful thing too. The hybrids, other beings coming here to help in that particular way by giving genetics to certain people. And then the walk-ins who actually can just pick up life in a body here and go on living a life and giving service. So what happens is that the original person, the one who wanted to leave, that the original person now has a whole new consciousness in that body. And so anybody who knew the original person recognizes, whoa, what happened? You're so different now. And the difference can happen just overnight, because often these soul exchanges happen during the night when the person here is asleep. And it happens even with a partner sleeping in the same bed. I know of a couple of cases I've worked with where that happened. They witnessed something happening, but they had no idea what it was. They didn't really see anything. But then when morning came, they realized, oh, this person looks the same, but is certainly acting differently, even sounding to what could have happened? So it's sort of a mysterious thing. And the souls coming in, of course, have quite a time, maybe, a year or even a few years to adjust to being here as a human being in a body. And of course, the original person always has had a family, sometimes children, sometimes a husband or a wife. And all of those people immediately recognize a profound difference in the person without knowing anything about soul exchanges. So it's been quite mystifying in some cases, but everybody eventually adjusts. And I would say, with all of the cases I know of walk-ins and people I've really worked with, um, the marriages that the original person had ends with the new person being in it. Not immediately, but when the walk-in person and the spouse realize that, wow, they're on a different wavelength now and they have nothing in common. There's no resonance. As one of them said, there's no resonance with us. So those marriages eventually end. And then the walk-in person is able to go ahead and do all the work that he or she came to do. So, I mean, I think that's a wonderful thing too. It probably isn't very widely known. And I didn't know about it until 1991, when I heard about a case that one of my past life therapy colleagues had been working on. And they had done a lot of work on why that person was allergic to just about everything here on Earth and was having a really difficult time. And it turns out that that allergic reaction to everything started just one particular day out of the blue. And the more they explored this and did regression work on what was the source of that sudden change, that's when they realized that that person is a walk-in. And fortunately, that had been discussed over the breakfast table at a past life therapy conference I was attending as a past life regression therapist. And I learned about that, the walk-in situation, for the first time. So that a couple of years later, when I was at a UFO conference in Wyoming, there was a couple, a middle-aged couple, who were talking to me about the mysterious thing that had happened to their daughter, who was in her mid-20s. And they said, she was very material-minded and very interested in clothes and cars and things like that. And then suddenly one day at breakfast, that daughter started talking about a whole different range of things, about metaphysical things, spiritual things, and wanted to learn more and more about that, and wanted to eventually open a bookstore in their area. This happened to be Colorado, and have a meeting room as part of this bookstore where she could do teaching about more cosmic subjects and other beings in the cosmos and metaphysics and spirituality, which she eventually did. I actually met the daughter and did a regression with her, and a couple of years later at the same conference, I regressed her again. So that was just wonderful that I had learned about walk-ins before meeting her and knew how to kind of, guide the session to include that sort of thing. And then other people have come along too in my practice who turn out to be walk-ins, sometimes from the spiritual realm their soul has come from, or sometimes from the extraterrestrial realm. All of that is possible and is happening to some extent. Well, there's so many directions we could go in from here.
Oh my gosh, yes. I want to. I got. I just. there was a couple times I wanted to interrupt and ask a question, but I was just sitting back, and oddly enough, I had sent you a list of questions as like a foundation kind of thing, as we typically do, but I had other questions that were not on this list that I was thinking of, and you actually answered them sort of almost as I was thinking of them.
Okay.
Like for example, when you were talking about the walk-ins, I was specifically, I sort of lifted up my hand. I wanted to say, like, well, what about, with the people who know them? Wouldn't they sort of recognize, or wouldn't there be a difference? And then immediately at that point, I mean, so I thought that was pretty wild. I just dropped my list, but yeah. So
Yes, it really does affect people around the walk-in. So I've been partnering this year with a wonderful, wonderful walk-in named Sheila Seppi, and she came in the late 1990s to the woman who was 38 years old. She did the exchange with a woman who was 38 years old. And that woman was married and already had 3 children. So Sheila, coming in and taking up that life, shall we say, inherited the 3 children and immediately felt a lot of love for them, fortunately, and I think has done a wonderful, wonderful job in raising them. They're all grown up now, and helping her in doing some of her healing work that she is doing. So those children really notice a tremendous change immediately, just one morning, notice a tremendous change in their mother, and they liked the change because the original person, the one who left and did the exchange, she had had a lot of physical problems and was not able to move around physically very much, and couldn't really play very much with the children or take them places and playgrounds and run around into the mountains and the beach and wherever they were. And suddenly their mom, who of course looked just the same, their mom at the walk-in, it was fun and peppy and had energy because she'd healed all those physical problems right away. And so the kids thought, oh, this is great. Mom has somehow really, really changed. And she looked the same, but she had gotten to be so much more energetic and interesting and fun and active. And so they really benefited from this too. And the marriage did have to end because they were on such different wavelengths, she and the husband. And I don't think it was a bitter divorce. It was just that they realized that, well, we just really don't have anything in common anymore. Let's just bless each other and go our own ways. And that's happened in every walk-in situation that I personally know about, that if there had been a marriage involved before the walk-in situation, those marriages eventually, or even fairly quickly, ended because the person was just so different.
wow,
Yeah.
that's very interesting.
Any other questions about that?
Well,
Yeah,
I'm
Barbra,
kind of. I'm sorry. Go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, I've got a question on that, please, Barbara. When the walk-in spirit comes in, does it have access to the life experiences and memories of the previous person?
Good question. Yes, they do have some of the memories of that person whom they walked in upon, but they don't have emotional attachment to those memories. In other words, if a friend or family members will say, "Oh, do you remember when you were 6 years old and we went to the farm and such and such happened?" The walk-in would, yeah, because it's in the brain of the person they entered into. But again, there's no emotional attachment to those memories. And they probably don't remember nearly as much as a regular person would, unless they're reminded of a certain event. And then it would be in the brain of the person they walked into. But again, not the emotional attachment to it. And yet, it's interesting to me, in knowing Sheila as well as I do now, that she very, very quickly felt a great love for these children. But I think she attributes that to the fact that coming from the extraterrestrial, very highly advanced extraterrestrial realm, Arcturian realm, that she came from, that she had the clairvoyance or perception to be able to see who each of these three children really were. You know, she could see more about them than most people would be able to see immediately, and therefore was able to have a lot of love for them because she could see that in them there was so much good. And they're all grown up now, as I said, and have a very, very good relationship, and have ever since Sheila came here.
I'm sort of assuming that Sheila is public about this because you're using her full name. I mean, would she be open to? I'd love to have a conversation with her if she's open to doing that. I mean, I would have so many questions for someone like that.
She probably would, and she's very, very interested, very interesting, and very likable. We've done a lot of podcasts together in the last several months because we've come out with a new book together, Sheila Seppi and Barbra Lamb, a book called Cosmic Convergence, Journeys of Walk-ins, Starseeds, and Hybrids. So Sheila, being a walk-in, has brought a tremendous amount of, I think, extremely interesting information with her uh, about life, about the soul, about life in the cosmos, about different dimensions, different densities. And of course, she has been very interested in the hybrid program too, and also the star seeds, which we have not mentioned yet, so I would like to mention. Star seeds are people who have been born here from human parents and are human, and yet in previous lifetimes, maybe a whole bunch of previous lifetimes, they had been extraterrestrials of different types. So they decided that they would like to help humanity and do that in such a way that they would be born here as a human, but be able to bring in some of the perspective, knowledge of the beings whom they used to be, the extraterrestrial beings. And so they bring knowledge and information and perspective to us from their own previous lifetimes as other types of beings. And they bring that in order to help raise the consciousness of humanity. And so they are people who didn't even know until adulthood, in many, many cases, that they are what we call a starseed. But they did notice that they had more unusual abilities than most of us have, psychic types of abilities, and they did have a lot of spiritual interests and spiritual perspective. That doesn't mean necessarily religious, but it does mean spiritual. And very often they have had a lifetime of being contacted by some of the extraterrestrial beings and learned from them as well. And then maybe they were adult before they realized that, oh, I have that heritage too. They might have always felt aligned with certain groups of extraterrestrials and wonder, why do I have such an affinity for that particular group, like Arcturians or Pleiadians or Andromedans or Syrians or whichever group of beings out there. And some of them have a lot of visits from those kinds of beings. And some of them will channel information from some of those beings. But anyway, they bring that perspective with them in various ways, wanting to acquaint people with the very benevolent beings that are out there in space that we have not known about or haven't believed in, haven't trusted. So they're sort of forming a liaison between us and other life out there in space. So they are very often getting groups of people together for sharing this kind of information. Or sometimes they will put on a seminar, a webinar, a conference in person. They're trying to sort of share this perspective, or sometimes they write about this. Nowadays, it's wonderful because more and more people can do podcasts. And I think a lot of the starseeds are doing podcasts to share their knowledge and to share this perspective. So they too are people who are really here for good, for sort of advancing the human race by raising consciousness and raising awareness of these larger realities that so many people have not been aware of, or they've been aware of them in terms of a particular religion. And that's fine, but there's a much broader perspective that we people can be aware of than we can in a particular religion.
Are we stuck on the reincarnation wheel, as some religious perspectives view this experience? And are these beings trying to assist us off that?
I think that we have been kind of caught on the incarnation wheel, and that many of us have found out one way or the other that we've had many, many human lifetimes. And yet, and when I first started getting into this past life therapy work, I assumed that any lifetime that we would have had in the past would be a human life. And indeed, most of us here have had many, 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 many human lives. But what I was finding out in my work, even back in the early 1990s, is that some people, or even in the 1980s actually, that some of my regular therapy clients, if we would do a regression after I started getting that training, that they would find that they had been an extraterrestrial being themselves. And that would come up in those past life regressions. So that kind of paved the way, in a sense, for me to be open to the fact that, you know, maybe they're not the only ones. maybe many of us have have been other kinds of beings in other lifetimes. So as time has gone on with more and more of this work, I have regressed people who go back to some of their extraterrestrial lifetimes and sort of to the essence of those extraterrestrial lifetimes that they had had. And it's very interesting to see the progression. In other words, the soul of one person, a woman, the first regression that we went to, which was a past life regression, it was a group of extraterrestrial beings she was part of, and they did not have a particularly advanced consciousness. They were okay, but and then she, as a soul, we found out through a whole series of regressions, not just one, that eventually she reincarnated from being that kind of being to another kind of extraterrestrial being. And that kind of extraterrestrial being, in a couple of lifetimes, or maybe a few, were experimenting with group consciousness rather than individual consciousness. And she went through those lifetimes as that kind of being. And then she chose another kind of being to incarnate as, and they were right on the brink of having complete open community consciousness. In other words, they didn't have their own individual consciousness like we do. And it would be more of a matter of like a hive mind. And in that lifetime, she couldn't quite agree with giving up her individual thought, individual consciousness, to have it be totally group consciousness. So then after that, her soul decided to reincarnate as yet a different kind of extraterrestrial being. And that kind of being was very, very involved in physical healing of physical problems. So in one of the regressions that we did toward the end of my time working with her, she found herself to be on a spaceship as one of those types of beings doing healing. So the situation was that there was a medical table and there were other beings like her, not human, standing around the table, and she was being taught healing, and the subject, the person they were healing, was a human man, not an extraterrestrial, but a human man who had been abducted, who had been taken for this experience. And she was, as one of these beings, was being taught how to heal him. And they were emphasizing what they called the energy code point, which she or I had never heard of in this life. And so she was learning to heal the energy code point. And it turned out that around the time that that experience had happened, although we didn't know it had happened until a few years later when we did the regression, but around that time when she was really learning that, unbeknownst to her conscious mind, she realized that she was very, very attracted to doing healing of human beings as a human being in this life. And so she left a job, which had a very promising career, is moving right up the ladder, great success and good earnings, and left that in order to take some of her savings and learn to do healing here. And she started healing people and opened a clinic just about the time that I was meeting her. She had opened a healing clinic and was really working with people. And that healing clinic is still going on today. Now, that regression was probably in the mid-1990s, but she's still doing a very successful healing clinic currently. That's her full life job. And no more of the corporate world that she had left, that just has no more interest in her, possibly. So it helped her to know, where this great healing original training and influence came from her having been one of those other beings. So with anybody I know whom I have regressed to past lives as extraterrestrial beings, they all look, sound, seem like absolutely human beings. And yet they have that heritage. So that's a whole new idea that I eventually had to take on board myself. And then I have been told through various people who have the talents to realize these things that I too have had a number of lifetimes, quite a large number of lifetimes, as an extraterrestrial being. In fact, into various species from a lifetime to another. And when I was told this information from a woman, a hybrid actually, who did a star knowledge session for me, a star origin session, she calls it, that, there had been about 8 or so different types of extraterrestrial species that I had had lifetimes as, in my past. And I, of course, don't consciously remember any of that, but I can believe it. I can absolutely believe it. And with each one of those species that she mentioned, there are lots of different extraterrestrial species that we know about. But as she mentioned those particular ones, I had a huge sense of, wow, identifying with it somehow. Like I felt all lighted up, when she would mention a certain one, and realize, that's why I have been so drawn to knowing about that kind of species in this lifetime, or that's why I really identify with that. For instance, one of them was a dolphin-like species. Not that we really had the form of dolphins, but we spent a lot of time in the water, and we had skin that was very similar to dolphin skin in our oceans. And when this was mentioned to me that I had been one of those types of beings in a few lifetimes, I immediately realized, that's why. That's why in this life I absolutely had to go and swim with dolphins a mile or so off the coast of the big island of Hawaii. And I did that for about 5 years in a row, for a week each year, just going out every morning in a boat with a wonderful group of people led by a woman named Joan Ocean. We would go out and be in the ocean off of a boat that took us out there, and ready to swim with the wild dolphins as they would come in from the even more open ocean. And I just knew that I had to do that, even though I've never been a good swimmer. I mean, I can swim, but I'm not a good swimmer. And yet I just had to experience being with them. And then after those experiences, having this star origin reading and being told that I was sort of a dolphin-like extraterrestrial being, it just absolutely made sense. It was wonderful to learn that. And here I am as a human. Here you are as humans. but you may very well, unbeknownst to you, have been other types of beings before being a human.
So when I was having lunch today before we all connected, I had a thought that I said to myself, wouldn't it be wild if we were all actually extraterrestrials who were projecting ourselves into these human bodies from all over the place? And that's not something I would typically think about, especially when eating lunch. But everything that you just said, that kind of, I don't know. I'm not saying that's what I think, right? But that, I mean, it just it fits in to a lot of the things that you just said. And this is a very interesting conversation. Like, I could talk to you all day long. Many questions. One of them is just like, if anyone out there is wondering if they might be a starseed, like other hallmarks or signs that they can sort of do a litmus test or something on that.
Oh, so you're asking if there's some sort of test? Well, I think that in hearing these characteristics, a person might or might not find themselves resonating with that. You go, oh yeah, I know what that's like. Oh, that's what I feel too. Or maybe they would hear these things and say, gee, I don't know, I don't think that's me. I don't get any hit on that. So in talking about the walk-ins and the starseeds and the hybrids, that this is the subject of the book, which Sheila Seppi and I have written, called Cosmic Convergence, The Journeys of Walk-ins, Starseeds, and Hybrids. So this book has just been released about a month ago, fresh off the press, and has so much interesting information. And Sheila has done a wonderful, wonderful job of talking about these things from her perspective of having walked in from a much more knowledgeable civilization of beings than we are, even though we're pretty advanced in many ways. And then I have added case studies, about 5 or 6 case studies that I have worked with in regression, real people right here on the earth, people who discovered that they were walk-ins, or discovered they were hybrids, or discovered that they were starseeds. So we've got a lot of very interesting, very expanding theory. I think you two would really appreciate the scope of the theories here. And then it sort of brings it right down to home with the case studies of real people who are those kinds of people.
I definitely want to get a copy of that. And where can anyone who's tuning in, where can folks find that? I mean, we're not necessarily done. I got more questions, but where can somebody pick up a copy of that book?
Well, definitely, it's available on Amazon. Very easy, just Cosmic Convergence. You don't have to put in the subtitle. And I sell them on my website, which is BarbaraLambRegression.com. And there's a section there where you can order books and pay through PayPal. And then I sign those books.
Nice.
You cannot get a signed copy from Amazon, but I do a signature and a nice little message for people who like that. Yeah.
Excellent. So, I mean, one of the questions I had for you is sort of going back just like on the abductees, is a couple of them actually. So I'm fascinated with this concept that people go through walls or up through ceilings onto these craft. And when we talked with Mary Rodwell a little bit ago, she had said something like 75% of the abductees that she's worked with, I believe that it's more of a spiritual experience than a physical experience. So, I mean, this is a multifaceted question, but like, what is your take on the going through the walls and the windows? Is that physical? Is it non-physical? And have you encountered the same kind of thing where an overwhelming majority of the folks you helped feel like it's more non-physical in nature than it is physical in nature? Is it?
Well, there's a lot of both, actually. And in many cases, it seems like we are taken physically, and that they, the beings, have ways of a word that keeps coming to my mind is dissembling our bodies. In other words, they kind of open up the particles of our bodies so that we don't, get stopped by a wall or a closed window. That we're another almost like porous enough that we can go through what we consider dense physical matter. That seems to be true. And then there are many cases where it seems more to the person that they've gone in the astral sense. In other words, their body remains where it originally was, and the essence, the soul, the consciousness, the non-physical part of us is taken, and that, of course, would be non-physical, so it's easily taken through a wall or something of that sort. So I think that there's both that happen, not to the same person at the same time, but to different people at different times. That's what I can surmise so far, anyway.
Okay.
And then I'd like to add to that some of the beings seem to be very physical. The beings who visit us and who take us and do all kinds of things with us on the ship. And some of those beings seem to be other dimensional, that they seem to be more in the astral form also. And they can appear as if they are physical beings, but they may not be. And they may be more energy, more of a whole different density than we are. And perhaps those are the ones who tend to take us more in the astral form that we sometimes go in rather than the physical form. And interestingly enough, in regard to that, there was a woman I worked with a few years ago, several times, and she lived with a man. They were a regular partnership. And he, on a couple of occasions, actually woke up in the middle of the night to see that she, the astral she, was taken from her body and through the wall, so forth, with a being, and yet her physical body remained there in bed with him. Mm-hmm. Now, he was a man who had an unusual ability to see things in other dimensions, and I think that that's why he could witness this with her. And for instance, he would be sitting watching television, and he would see these little shadow beings running along the floor between him and the television. And he had a nickname for them. They were scoochies or something like that. They didn't look like little people. They were just little beings of some sort. And yet they were other dimensional. And she would be sitting on the sofa right next to him. And he'd come, oh, there go the little scoochies again. And she would look and she didn't see them. She didn't have that particular kind of sight to see into that other dimension. But there are other dimensional things happening here with us. And there are a few people, once in a while, who are able to detect them. Most of us probably aren't. I'm not good at detecting that, for instance. But I definitely know people who are.
To throw you a little curveball, but have you ever seen a UFO yourself, or have you ever seen a non-human entity yourself?
Yes, that's a whole Could be, should be a whole book in itself. Well, anyway, um, yes, I have had a few sightings over the years that are very, very convincing to me. They're not just a little dot up way up in the sky. They're, something formed, something that looks like, oh, they might be like a mile away, maybe, or maybe more, or in some cases less. Sometimes these UFO crafts will surround themselves with clouds, like a beautiful white cloud. Like, no, I've seen this a few times when there's no other cloud in the sky. And suddenly here is this beautiful, big sort of lenticular shaped white cloud, pretty bright in a daytime sky. And that it certainly seems, anyway, as if there is a structured craft hiding in that cloud. And I've seen one time on a Stephen Greer workshop in about 1990 in Wyoming. There were sort of thin, stripy clouds with the sunset just setting behind them. So it was sort of a beautiful orangey, peachy colored glow. And I was just watching that because it was a pretty sunset. And then I noticed that, oh my goodness, out of one of those thin, strippy clouds, there flew a silver disc thing. It looked like from, oh, at least a couple of miles away that I must have been from where it was, across a huge, huge field. It looked like about the size of a silver dollar, and silver with that late afternoon sunshine shining on. And that disc flew out of the cloud and sort of jiggled around a little bit and stopped. And then another one just like it came out of the cloud, and they jiggled around together, and they both flew back the other direction into that cloud. So that was my first sighting. That was very exciting. And then a couple of times I've either been at a UFO conference, like one was in New Mexico, and I had been giving a lecture at the conference that morning, and then was having lunch on the patio of that hotel where the lecture was. And then a woman I was talking to she lived in the area, New Mexico, she pointed, she said, oh, behind you, there's one of those UFOs. So I looked around, and there was, again, sort of a lenticular shaped cloud, bright, very bright white cloud, the only cloud in the area. And it was almost like shining from within. And she said, oh, she said, that happens every time we have a UFO conference here, once a year, that there will be one of those UFOs nearby picking up on everything that's being said at the conference, because they want to know what we know. They want to know what we know about them, what we think about them. And then another time I was in Reno, Nevada, going to, it wasn't a conference, but it was a gathering of us very like-minded people investigating these things. And on the way to that meeting, and this was late afternoon too, but there was over on the horizon, probably a mile or maybe more away from where we were driving, there was another cloud just like that, lenticular shaped, white, and perfectly shaped. And as we were driving along, it was very, very slowly, slowly, slowly moving along. So I think that was it. Oh, but I guess the first thing that I saw was in 1991 in Mesquite, Nevada, at a conference of the International UFO Congress. And I was on my way back to the meeting hall from lunch in a different facility, is walking along, and suddenly I felt something. My attention was drawn upward, and I saw 7 perfectly lenticular shaped gray clouds, and there were no other clouds in the sky. So here were suddenly these 7 in a formation, like a clump almost. And I just stopped, and they were so close over the top of the building, the 1-story building. I mean, they were probably only maybe 50 feet up or so, and they weren't moving. And I just stopped, and I felt a huge sense of presence, like there was somebody in those looking at us. There were a few people behind me who we all stopped and and saw them. One was a man who is a channel, and he channeled some information from them. And I wanted so much to stay there and watch them. I mean, I know that we were being watched. They did, it's a very strong feeling you can have sometimes when you just know somebody's watching you, and you turn around and yes, there is somebody watching you, with that sort of feeling. And but I left the scene because I was just about to hear a lecture by Bob Dean, and I'd heard a lot of things about him, and I really, really wanted to hear him. So the other people, about 5 people behind me, stayed for a while, and later they told me that after I had gone in the building, that 2 of these perfectly sized and shaped lenticular, quote unquote, clouds flew away, leaving the other 5 standing there in the air.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't
Wow.
like wind came and blew 2 of them away. They flew away. They said it was very, very specific and deliberate. So that was extremely thrilling. And then in England in 1994, I had requested this, and I was taken for the making of a crop circle. And in the night, around 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 little beings approached me in the inn that I was staying in. I was in bed, but not yet asleep. I had just gotten into bed, and they came, and when they got really close to the bed, I could see just their silhouettes. Then I, put my head down on the pillow and just went out of consciousness. Wasn't aware of anything till the alarm clock woke me up a few hours later. And then we went on I was with a conference group at that point, and we went on a big bus looking for crop circles, and I found one from the top of the double-decker English bus, and went back with 3 other friends too, and we were the first ones in it. It had just been made, and that was a magnificent experience. And then a couple of weeks later, when I was back home again, I had a colleague regress me to that experience of that night, seeing the 3 beings coming toward me in that room, and then not knowing anything else. And it turns out I got a lot of detail about being on that ship, and how they made that crop circle very quickly, just a few seconds. And they made this gorgeous, beautiful, wonderful crop circle that I happened to be the one to discover and the first one in it. So it all kind of tied together. So that was really, really thrilling, that whole thing.
I've definitely got a question about that one, please. How did you request? What protocol did you use to request the crop circle?
Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't request the crop circle itself, but I did request being taken for the making of it. So
Wow.
I'll back up a few months. So that was 1994. Anyway, in 1991, I started regressing a woman to her extraterrestrial experiences, which she had had all of her life. And she also, very frequently in my office, would channel a particular extraterrestrial being. And this being and I would have many, many conversations. I got to feel like he was a really good friend and colleague and advisor. Anyway, the winter of 1994, he told me, because he knew I was pledged to go to England every summer for crop circles. He told me that if I wanted to, I could be taken for the making of a crop circle. And at that point, I think, oh boy, I don't know. I'm not sure I want to get involved in that. I don't know what that would entail. But after 6 months thinking about it here and there and getting ready to go to England for crop circles that summer, in the last channeling that happened with him, I asked, I think I'm ready now. I would like to be taken for the making of a crop circle. How do I bring that about? And he said, well, and here's the answer to your question. Uh, he said, you just talk to them out loud. You won't know who you're talking to, and that's all right. They'll pick it up, but just convince them that you really honor what they're doing with the crop circles, and you really would be so pleased because you're more and more involved in this field. And, um, just convince them that you really would like to be taken and that you will be sharing the information, because I was already giving quite a number of crop circle lectures and interviews at that time, and um, continued to do that for many years after too. But anyway, just convince them. So that's what I did on the way to the airport to go to England that summer in July. I was talking while driving along the freeway, talking to them probably for 45 minutes straight at least, maybe 50 minutes. And I didn't know whom I was talking to, but I was so enthused about the crop circles and so honoring of them and so wondering about the mystery of them. Where are they coming from? What is this intelligence? How are they doing this? That, I was talking about all of that with them and saying, I would be so honored if I would be taken for the making of a crop circle. And so I think that I was heard and responded to.
Wow.
How this happens, I can't tell you, but 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 I was, and it was a typical thing of three beings who had come in through the area of the window, probably right through the closed window, and came toward my bed that I was lying in. And then I didn't, I was out of consciousness, so I think they affected that and took me. How they got me onto the craft, I don't really know. But in the regression, it came out of being in the craft and being taken by beings who were behind and put in a barrel-shaped chair. And then I could watch what was happening and sense what was happening. And that I got a really good look at the interior, and only the sort of the backs of the heads of the two beings that seemed to be in charge of piloting the machine. I never really got a good look at the three who took me. But anyway, I was able to get an artist to do a nice depiction of the interior as I could see it, the interior of the craft. And it was a small craft, probably, I would guess, about 20 feet in diameter, that flew out over a wheat field, and I could hear it making the crop circle. I couldn't see what it was doing, but it felt like a big sort of swooshing sound was coming down through the center of the craft that I was sitting right very close to. And it sounded like suddenly turning on a big fire hose, like a spray sort of sound, but I couldn't see it because the floor was between me and it coming down. I knew we were over a wheat field. And the way that the little craft moved with these swooshing down it sounded like we were going around in a circle. And that's the way that crop circle was. It was a circle made of circles, descending in size toward the end, and then a ring around it. So it sounded just like what was happening from the ship.
Barbara, I'd like to ask you a question, please, and I'll understand if you don't want to answer it, but have you ever been approached by the intelligence community or aerospace or secret societies for help or information on this research you're doing?
Well, one time only at a MUFON meeting, a local MUFON meeting, I was approached by a very tall man. I describe him as steely looking. In other words, no warmth, no expression, just maybe almost a Dick Tracy, jawline. Harsh, attractive, but harsh, very tall man. And he came over to me at the break between the lecture that was being given that night and the question period. And he came over and he seemed to know who I was. I didn't know who he was. And he said something like, when can I see the records of the people you regress to extraterrestrial experiences? And I said, you can never see those. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I am mandated to keep all client information absolutely private. And he said, well, where do you keep that information?
Oh, gee.
And I said, that is not your business. I am not divulging that. And he tried again, a couple more questions, and realized I just wasn't bending on that. So he just turned and walked away. No thank you or nice to meet you or anything like that. He just turned on his heel and walked away. And at the end of the lecture, I noticed that he wasn't there anymore. I think he must have left. So I think he was there for that reason. But that's the only, thank goodness, only instance of that type of thing that I have been aware of.
Fascinating. Thank you.
One of the questions I had for you, and I think it would be great from your background as a licensed psychotherapist, with the idea of, like, it seems like pretty much almost everyone, if not everybody, sort of either forgets or doesn't really remember what happened when they were abducted until, like, maybe they get like a little, I don't know what you call it, like a trigger or something, the little pieces come back or they get regressed. Why do you think that is? Is that our brains protecting us from what we were perceiving as trauma, or do you think these beings are doing something intentionally to sort of wipe our memories, and if so, that's not really effective because you can uncover it, right? But I mean, ultimately, why do you think that is, that most people just don't remember?
I think it's both reasons that you're giving. I think that uh, part of it is that this is so new and so unacceptable to so many people and so mysterious, and the beings are not. I mean, it's not like they're beautiful angels all glowing with light. They're sweet music, when they come. I mean, they really can traumatize people, scare them very much. So I think that's part of it, that we, with our own mental mechanisms, can blanket out if we feel the need to. So I think that that is part of it, and but a big part of it, I think, maybe even more than that, is that the beings themselves have a way of making us not aware. Just like when they come into a room at night and there's somebody sleeping in the bed or in the room with the person who's going to be taken, the beings have a mechanism of turning them off. We call it being switched off, just like they do with groups of people if a person is being taken from a group that I mentioned. Um, and how they do this, I don't know. It's quite mysterious to me. But they do make anybody, including the person being taken, to be as unconscious as possible. They're not harmed, as far as I can see, by being made unconscious, but they definitely are made to be out of conscious awareness. And so I had a very interesting situation, and this happened in the early 2000s, that a woman I had regressed many, many times to uh, experiences with different kinds of beings, mostly to mantis beings. She got to the point where she was so unafraid of it all. The more she knew from these regressions, the less fearful she became. And she got to the point where she wanted to be taken and remain completely conscious through the whole experience. She felt she was really ready for that. And so she said, "What do I do?" And I said, "Well, ask them." You don't know who you're talking to, but ask them. Say, "Next time, please, whoever you are, wherever you are, next time you come for me, please let me be aware of the whole experience from the beginning moment to the end." So they granted her wish. And this group of beings came. In this case, it wasn't the mantis beings, but other beings she had had experiences with. And they levitated her up out of the bed, and the bedclothes sort of slid off. And she was being levitated and moved across her bedroom toward the wall. And there were a few beings there, and everything was fine. She said, "Oh, good, good. I'm aware. I'm aware." But then she looked down from where she was, about probably 6 feet or so up off the floor, being levitated, realized how high she was, and suddenly she panicked,
Mm.
you know, because there was nothing supporting her. Even they weren't really touching her, they were just floating her. And so she started, flailing her arms and legs. And immediately, two of them took this big roll of netting. She said it was reminded her of fish netting, and wrapped it around her, wrapped her up like a cocoon so that she couldn't flail out her arms and legs. And then they took her through the wall. She was conscious, and took her through the air and then into a spaceship and stood her upright on the floor, and then unfurled this fish netting stuff. So she didn't have any of that around her anymore. And then she went on to have the rest of the experience. And one of the beings there was a being that had been channeling through her, and she had known his name but didn't know anything about what he looked like. He was an extraterrestrial being. he stood there. So she met him. And then she met, oh, the most glowing being that she could ever imagine, sitting in what impressed her as like a throne, which was all lighted too. Anyway, a very, very, very high spiritual being. And she got to talk to him and have a blessing from him. Turned out to be a really wonderful experience. But anyway, as they were putting the netting around her, as she was being levitated across her room, they said, "We thought this might happen, and we don't want you to injure yourself, and we don't want you to injure us."
Wow.
So that is probably a really good indication of why the beings make us not conscious and unable to move.
Well, that almost sounds like a hint in a way, where if they're taking us through a wall, we can't be all flaring around like a fish out of water or something. We have to be like I don't know, whatever, like a board or something. I think that it's beyond my brain capabilities, but there's people who tune into this who might be able to look into that or explain it. Like, why would we not be able to be? What difference does it make if you're going to go through the wall? What difference does it make if your hand's flaring around or not? But I think there's
Well,
something to that.
I'm taking them seriously when they said, "We don't want you to injure yourself, and we don't want you to injure us,"
Oh
because
yeah, no, I mean, I'm not saying I disbelieve it. I'm saying that the
yeah,
fact that would have to occur to not move your hand while you're going through a physical object or whatnot. I think I don't know
Indicate
what the
something.
answer is, but there's telling us something.
Now, Barbara, forgive me for playing what might be described as devil's advocate, but you can probably understand, appreciate why some people listening to this may see this as a form of demonology. And there are certainly parallels with ceremonial magic and some of the things you're describing. Do some of the experiences wrestle with that? And have you heard that sort of opinion before?
I've heard that idea before. That some people think that these are demons, demons being the work of the devil and all of that, satanic. Um, I don't, I don't have that impression at all, but I can easily see why people might have that impression because of the way they look and the mysterious things that they can do, the way that they can act. So I can see why some people might think that if that's where their own focus tends to be on demonic things. Uh, but I don't personally don't think that that's the case. I mean, there are beings who do things that people really, really don't like. I mean, there is that in reality. I definitely acknowledge that. The thing is that I don't just leave it at that. I mean, I really try to find out, why the beings are doing what they do. Um, and always so far, it really makes great sense. Or sometimes they're not necessarily looking for a health problem, but they're upgrading the person's DNA, or they're giving the person extra abilities, like, for instance, paranormal or psychic abilities. And so giving the people the ability to heal. There are cases of that too, where they're teaching people healing techniques. And but if you didn't know that that's what they were doing, it might seem really, really weird and might seem quite negative. That's why I think it's so worthwhile to try to find out from the beings what they're doing, and then it all makes great sense. But I keep being struck by the fact that the environment that the two of you are sitting in front of is sort of a curved wall with lights.
Right.
top.
Yeah.
That reminds me very much of, not exactly, but very much of the interior of a UFO.
Wow.
Interesting. I didn't consider that until now, but yeah, that's
It's a good observation.
I wondered if
Thank you.
it was deliberate.
I don't think so. And thank you for that response, Barbara. Um, from what I hear, experiences are sometimes told by the beings, "You are special" or "You are chosen." What do you make of this? Is this an appeal to the experiencer's ego? Is it to keep them calm, or do you think there's some truth to these statements?
I think there's some truth to it, because like some of the star seeds, for instance, and the walk-ins and the hybrids, uh, they really do have a reason to be here, and that the sort of charge them up, give them extra energy or extra clarity. Um, and maybe some of it's deliberately for ego, but I don't think that that's the main thing. Of course, it does give an ego a boost to anybody, being told by very intelligent beings that, you're special or you're different. Probably anybody would like to hear that. But I don't think that that's really their motivation from as far as I could tell.
Okay, thank you. And I don't mean to sound negative with this line of questioning, but I realize that some of our viewers will be thinking these things. So there's also a possibility where a contactee or experiencer can then become a type of prophet or maybe start a new movement. Now, that may be a positive or a negative thing, I don't know, but I find that aspect very interesting as well.
Right. I'm really not particularly familiar with, starting a big movement or being a prophet, but uh, I think what is akin to that is, for instance, what Sheila Seppi is doing. So here she is, a walk-in from a very highly advanced race of extraterrestrial beings, and she keeps getting messages from what she calls the collective. That's a group of beings who inspire her and who were um, guiding her originally to leave the realm that she was in, the extraterrestrial realm, and do the soul exchange with the woman she exchanged with when she did the walk-in experience. So they keep giving her inspirations to like start the conscious awakening network, in which people who are really very high in consciousness and exploring spirituality can give podcasts and give lectures and seminars and things. She's um, like recruiting a lot of people who are very advanced in their spirituality and understanding of things, to educate others by being on this podcast platform. And she puts on speakers like every Monday night and Tuesday night. She has somebody come and lecture, and she sometimes hosts a conference of very high-minded people. So, uh, I mean, I wouldn't call her a prophet, nor I think would she call herself a prophet, but she definitely gets inspiration from that higher source, which she calls the collective, to do these different outreaches. And all of this is, in an attempt to raise the consciousness and raise the spirituality of humanity. So I
Thank
don't
you.
know about anybody who um, has particular cults. Maybe there are people like that, but I'm just not personally aware of them.
I'm sure there are. I know that there are at least one or two cultish kind of places. But so I'm kind of curious too. This is maybe, I don't know. I don't want to come across the wrong way, but I'm sort of legitimately interested in this as well. Like when people who have experiences, do they? Does it? How do I say this the right way? I've heard anecdotally that a lot of people who have experiences can't really hold down a job or have like what we would consider a normal life. Is that an accurate anecdotal thing or not really?
I think that there is some of that, but I would assess that most people having these experiences uh, go ahead and live their lives. They have family lives. They have to work because they have to support themselves, and they go ahead and they do that. And some of them become more interested in learning more about all of this that we're talking about. And probably there are many people, maybe millions of people, who have these experiences and don't look into it. Maybe one reason is they don't know where or how to look into it, whom to talk to, whom to read about. Um, and fortunately, there are groups now there are many groups that exist for experiencers of extraterrestrial contact. And I know I myself led these groups at the International UFO Congress for many years, and probably 20, 25 years or more, and at some of the other big UFO conferences too. And then there are people beside myself who lead those. And there are the local MUFON groups, and there's the huge MUFON organization. I mean, there really are places for people to go to learn more about this. And experiencers who've maybe never worked with anybody individually, uh, they keep looking for groups and opportunities and conferences to learn a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. So that's why the experiencer groups, which I started at the UFO Congress, were just so appreciated by those people. And the people who attended those groups were not always known experiencers. In other words, they might have experienced these contacts and yet they weren't sure, they didn't know. But they certainly were interested enough to come and learn as much as possible. And some of the members were just tremendously relieved to be able to tell a group of people about their experiences and to be taken at least reasonably seriously, in many cases, totally seriously. Because one of the big problems is that most of the people, or many of the people anyway, who have these experiences with the other beings, they really have nobody in their lives to talk to about it. And even in their own family, very often there's, oh, don't talk about that stuff, or that's just nonsense, or you're just dreaming, or you're just making it up. And yet, even some of those other family members may have had experiences too that they've been denied about. It's very common, that when there's one person in a family who's had extraterrestrial contact, that there would be at least one other family in one generation or another, or even their own generation, who's also having contact, because some of the beings, anyway, are very, very interested in following genetic lines from one generation to another. So that's why there will be several generations in one family, where at least one person, sometimes more, will be taken by the beings and studied.
That was actually one of my questions too, that I wanted to put out there because, like, why are some people taken versus not?
Oh, great question. Well, something I've been very interested in right from the beginning. Um, as far as I know from a few different sources, we make a soul agreement with the beings before we incarnate into this lifetime. So in other words, and I've known this from other parts of my work too, particularly the regression work, that we are all ongoing, continuing souls. And now and then we decide to come from the spirit realm into the physical realm, either as a human or as one of the other kinds of beings. But we'll talk right now about coming in to Earth as a human being. That there's like a little committee of advisors that get together with us as souls when we're about to be born into a life here. And so there are lots of things that are discussed, like different themes that people are going to be working on and different things that they hope to make up for, maybe that they've done in previous lives, hope to make up for that in this life, or quite a number of considerations, including which country, which culture they are choosing to be born in, which race, which family group, which set of circumstances. And there are all reasons for these choices. It's all for learning, experiencing different things and learning, which helps the soul to evolve. So anyway, when we're doing this planning before being incarnated into this life, we realize that there are some other kinds of being, that is, the souls, the spirits of other kinds, which we call extraterrestrials, who come into that planning session, and they ask the soul who's about to incarnate, in your lifetime on Earth, will you cooperate with us? Will you help us with some of our projects? And the soul says, yes, sure, I'll do that. And just like everything else we have decided as a soul before coming into this lifetime, we forget that when we're here. As we're born and we grow up and live our lives here, we, in most cases, have forgotten why we came. And the why means several different reasons, not just one, why we came into life. So, in other words, then eventually in life, when we get visited by these beings, we have forgotten totally that there was such a thing. And we have forgotten that, we have on the soul level made an agreement. So it's a kind of like a pretty serious thing. We've seriously said, yes, we'll help you do whatever you want to do. And we forget that. So it seems shocking and seems like a complete mystery when these things do begin to happen, when these beings appear. So there's the question of, what if you really don't want to continue with this? I've had some clients who said, I really don't want any more of this. And what I was told by that extraterrestrial who kept channeling to me for 10 years or so, he said, you can break the contact with those beings if you really, really want to. You have to explain that when you made the contract with them before coming into this lifetime, you didn't realize what it would entail. And it's definitely something you do not want to continue. So you hereby are breaking your contact. And with a few people I know who have done that, as far as I know, they have not had any more contacts from those beings. But it has to be, it's almost like a negotiation. You negotiated to cooperating with them, and now you're negotiating to not have anything to do with that anymore. Apparently, from some people I know of, and some people I personally know, that has been effective. But you would really have to seriously get to that decision, that point within yourself. No, I
That
really don't want this anymore.
that actually, in some way, makes a lot of sense. Uh, when I hear that, but has there ever been anyone who got to that point and sort of talked their way out of it, and then later said, "Oh, I miss it," or "I want it back again," or is it just like a one-way street where you can do it, but once you make that decision, it's done and there's no going back?
I don't really know the answer to that, but I would think from what I do know is that if a person broke the contract and then wanted to resume having experiences again, that if they talk to the beings, just talk out loud, even if you don't feel that they're right there, they will hear you. They probably would still be aware of you as an individual because you'd been involved with them before. So they might, I really don't know, but I would think that they would respond to that and keep meeting with the person if they really thought this person was sincere about it. I don't know
Interesting.
anybody who's done that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I mean, if you do go that far to be like, I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore, it's unlikely that you would then say, "Oops, just kidding." But I was just kind of curious.
Just kidding.
Barbara, have you had anyone of a high profile nature, anyone famous, come to you? And I'm not asking you to mention any particular names, please, but they come to you quietly for assistance with this type of experience?
I've had a couple of people like that, but I don't have permission to mention their name. And as a
Hmm.
therapist, I'm very mandated to keep, uh, identities personal. Even though I talk about real people's experiences, I try not to give any hint of who they are because their material is private.
Well, I really respect that, and I want to honor you for playing that role for them. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the thank you.
um, I was curious too, just maybe sort of real quick, like what is the single most recurring theme between all of the folks that you've worked with encounters and abductions? Like, is there one or maybe two themes that keep coming back? Like,
Well, yeah, I don't think we can glean it down to just one. One of them certainly is that they want our well-being, and so they do the physical checkups and heal what they can, or influence us to get the healing here. That's one theme. Another theme seems to be to let other people know about the reality of them, that they really exist and that they really interact with human beings. And some of them really want human beings to be teaching about the cosmos and about the consciousness in the cosmos, in the other realities that we don't see, the the astral plane, the spiritual plane, the different densities, the different dimensions, even the different dimensional beings. And then there's a big theme too about some of the beings who want humanity to evolve enough, really clean up our act, and then deserve to be part of the great galactic federation. So they know that some people on Earth would be ready for being part of the galactic federation, would be delighted to be representatives to that. But they know that the majority of human beings, when you consider the worldwide population, um, do not have that in their consciousness. And there's too much crime and war and greed, etc., abuse of other people going on, that our planet is just simply not anywhere near ready to be part of the Galactic Federation. which is made up of good nations, good species who cooperate together universally. And some of these beings would very much like to see Earth and humanity evolve enough to be members of that group. That would go very well. And but we're nowhere near that. We've got to stop doing wars and trying to take control of the world and the nasty things that are going on, all the trafficking of humans and children. And I mean, it's just amazing. The more and more that comes out about all of this that's been going on, the more and more I realize, oh, we are really, really far from being members of the Galactic Federation. And the Galactic Federation is a very good thing, a good body of many, many, many different species of beings. I've had some clients actually who, a few, who have gone to different council meetings with some of the other beings. And one person went twice that we know of through regression to enormous intergalactic council meetings, maybe the Galactic Federation, where they were discussing problems that they have with various planets, problems on those planets. And so a few humans that I know of, that I've worked with, so there are probably more that I don't know about, that they are taken to these large meetings. But still, it's very evident that Earth as a humanity, as a whole, is nowhere near ready enough, advanced enough to be part of those big federations, which is really too bad. It would be wonderful if we would be qualified for that. But we've got a lot to clean up and to keep from happening here if we want that sort of advancement.
I would absolutely agree, and I would also venture to say that right there is, in my opinion, the exact reason why people aren't getting that capital D disclosure from the President of the United States that they so desperately seem to want. Is that, what do you think about that?
Well, I think the whole disclosure project is very interesting as it's coming along so far. I mean, I am very pleased that it is now allowed to be talked about. And
Yeah, definitely progress.
UFO sightings and experiences are allowed to be reported officially. It's taken seriously. But what I do not favor particularly is that so far it seems like the emphasis in our public hearings is all about national defense. And I can understand why a government would be primarily concerned with defense. I'm not thinking that that's a bad thing. I'm just thinking that it hasn't gone far enough. For instance, with the hearings that have happened so far, and what I've been able to hear of them, there has not been talk about people's individual experiences with the extraterrestrial beings, and not very much at all about the beings themselves, because there are many different kinds of beings, and some of them are just supremely wonderful and advanced, beyond where we are. So it's been mentioned that there are remains, that there are biologicals, as they call them, bodies, and that's good, but it just needs to go a whole lot further. And I would like to see in these hearings knowledgeable people being able to stand up and speak about people's experiences with the beings. It's not just a matter of the crafts flying around in the sky. I mean, there are people who are being profoundly affected personally by this. And I don't think that has been coming out as far as I know in the hearings. So we've got a long way to go, but I'm grateful that we've started. That's a good thing, I think.
I'll ditto that for sure. Long way for sure, and but we've come a long way. I think in the last couple of years, but there's still a long way to go too. I absolutely agree.
Right. And I have concerns that with what's coming out in the congressional hearings, because it's oriented toward defense, and do we need to gear up and fight these things, shoot them down, and try to capture them or whatever? I mean, that's all a very pugnacious point of view, and all of the other, like the personal contacts and the inspirations that happen in many people from these beings, none of that, and the healings that happen, the teachings that happen, the channeling that happens of information of so much huger a scope. That's not, as far as I know, that's not really been touched upon yet. There's a long way to go, but hopefully we'll keep going
Exactly. Yeah.
and realize that this is not just a matter of defense, and I do have a lot of concerns that a lot of this knowledge that's coming out now about the UFOs or UAPs, as they call them, that is being used as a fear tactic. And it doesn't need to be used as a fear tactic. I think that we've seen nothing really about UFOs having done any destructive acts. And even these drones now that are over New Jersey and other places too, and swarms of them, it's very impressive. But I think that there's more and more people feeling that this may be a hologram, maybe holographic action, that we're not being invaded. Nobody has been invaded, but I think that there is a certain group of people, very influential people, who may be using that whole drone thing or any other mass sighting like that, as a fear technique that we need to arm and we need to get ready to fight off more and more. And yet they've done nothing to destroy anything. I don't think we're being bombed by any of them, or people are being killed or anything, or taken prisoner, really. So I just am concerned about the way all of this may be used, if not already.
Only time will tell, I guess. It's interesting, as we've said many times in previous shows. It's an interesting time to be alive.
Right, and to not jump to conclusions.
Exactly.
Because it's unknown and it seems mysterious, that it's a threat. Not to automatically assume. I mean, maybe this is part of a great enlightenment for all we know. But I think humans tend to not feel that way about things that we don't know. We tend to feel more suspicious, and that it's more likely whatever is different is a threat. Like, for instance, the Bigfoot, the Sasquatch beings. I've never heard of them going into a village and killing people or eating them or stealing them or whatever. But they're mysterious and they're relatively unknown. So a lot of the tendency of a lot of humans is to put a big fear thing on them. But in fact, there have been many people whom I know of who've had very peaceful, wonderful relationships with Sasquatch, with mutual communication and helpfulness and sharing, uh, caring, uh, being rescued from certain situations by a Sasquatch coming along and helping a person who's really in bad straits out there in the wilderness.
Oh, wow.
But I think it's so easy for people to feel, oh, they're different and they're mysterious and they've got to be a threat to us. But I don't think they do threatening things. I don't think that's the reality of it. But because they're not known very much, not understood, it's easy to have a negative impression.
Wow.
So I really appeal to people to be more open-minded, and if they're interested in these things at all, to try to find out as much as you can, and be open to the good aspects of these beings, whether they're extraterrestrial or they're Sasquatch or whomever. Uh, you know, give it a chance to know what it is, and not
Thank
just
you. Excellent.
conclusions.
Excellent point.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to express my gratitude. This has been absolutely fascinating. It's
Huh.
been like an alien download for me. So much to integrate, and very
Mhm.
grateful for you as a person, the work you're doing, and the fact that you're so open in sharing this information. Much love to you, my friend.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's very nice. It's a pleasure for me to share because I think all of this is important and certainly fascinating. And the more that we can know about it, the better, because I'm totally convinced that this is part of reality. Oh, you had asked a while ago if I'd had any direct experience with the beings. And yes, I had one show up in my living room one afternoon several years ago. It happened to be a reptilian being who was
Wow.
there with lots of sunlight coming in my windows. It was very, very clear. I wasn't asleep or anything, wasn't even sleepy. And for about 5 minutes, he stood there and talked to me as we shared a handshake. And he said, to let me know that these experiences of people I was working with in regression, that they were real, that I can totally trust it, because they knew, he and his other kind, he called them beings from elsewhere rather than aliens or extraterrestrials. He referred to them as beings from elsewhere. And he said that they knew that when I'm working with a person in regression, I am completely with them, completely being in trust, completely trusting them, believing it. And then if I'm in another part of the world, I've done a lot of world travel, and then focus on very different things. And every once in a while, somebody will ask me, well, what do you do? And I mention this part of my work. And I have a fleeting thought, huh, I wonder if that could really be true. I know it must sound strange to this person. And because of those very fleeting thoughts that happen very, very rarely, um, when I'm not doing the work, uh, the beings from elsewhere, thought it would be good to have one of their ambassadors, this reptilian being, coming to me and giving me my own experience that I couldn't possibly deny. So I'm very grateful for it, even though he was a reptilian. And there's a lot of bad rap about reptilian extraterrestrials. This one, so I presume there are more like him. Um, this one was very benevolent, very kind, felt very, very safe. Felt like you would have a contact with a new person who seemed like, oh, this is a really good person. That's the sense I had of him and still do.
Interesting. I'm just kind of curious. Did he have like a human form, or more like a reptilian form? Because I've seen different renditions of like human-looking people with like scales, and then like reptile people with like the longer noses, kind of things. Like, which one? Like, how did he look?
Well, yeah, he had a body like a human athletic male. I've since seen pictures of male gymnasts since then who reminded me of the build of this particular being. You know, very muscular. He was not hugely tall. He was probably about 5'5" or 6" at the most. I was a little bit shorter than that by an inch or two, and but very muscular, very nice, muscular, strong build. He didn't appear to have clothing on, but he had uh, a lot of variegation of color on his skin, you know, all over his head and neck. It was a little bit different on the neck area, more of a brown, but everywhere else, the head, the face, the whole body was kind of a mottled assortment of greens and yellows and even tans, but more tan at the neck. And his face kind of came out, you know, it didn't have like a flatter face with a nose that sticks out. The whole face kind of came out a bit. I never did see his mouth. I think it might have been down around his chin. And yet he had what I would describe as a very pleasant expression, you know, not distinctly a smile that I could see, but just a very likable, friendly expression. And his eyes were bright yellow, like yellow marbles, perfectly round and shiny. And then in the pupils, they were like a little vertical slit, except that they had like a little jog in them, like the way we would draw a lightning strike.
Hmm.
So both pupils were like that, and they were very mesmerizing. I mean, I just kept staring into these eyes because it was so beautiful. And, you know, somehow they seemed to have a nice expression in them. There was nothing the least bit threatening about any of this. And as I was looking in his eyes, mostly, you know, I was sort of in the peripheral vision, taking in his head and neck and shoulders and that area. And I remember that I distinctly did not want to look down at the hand that I was holding because I thought if I see talons or claws or anything like that, I'm not going to be comfortable, and I want to keep on with this comfortable feeling. So I never looked down at his hand and his feet. I didn't see a tail. Sometimes people have asked me about that. I don't know if he had one or not, but I didn't see any indication of a tail. Um, so it was a very fascinating experience and completely by surprise. Had no idea anything like that would ever happen. But I'm really glad that it did happen. And it opened up my perspective about reptilian beings because I had worked with many people before that who'd had experiences with reptilians. And some of those reptilians they had worked with um, were more safe, benign, okay, you know, but some of them seemed to be more threatening, mostly because they were so large, you know, 6'5" or so. And Some of them seem to be more arrogant. Some of them seem to be more interested in sex with humans. Um, anyway, I'd heard a lot of things about reptilians before that. This guy was just really feeling safe and good and interesting. And uh, it really opened up my perspective uh, about reptilians to think that there probably are quite a number of different varieties of reptilians, different reptilian species, I would assume. And this was just one of them, one of the better kinds. So that was helpful to me to get that perspective too.
Well, that makes total sense. I mean, there's so many different versions of us, right? I mean, just look around the world and all of the different backgrounds and skin tones that we have, and
Right.
it would make sense that if there's other the other species out there, whatever the correct term is, right, that they would be as sort of diverse as we are.
Yeah, I think so too. And I don't think before that experience I had really considered that. I think I had thought all reptilians were pretty much the same and all Arcturians were the same, all Pleiadians were the same. And I've since learned that no, there really is quite a bit of variation among any of those species.
Yeah.
The universe is really an amazing place, you know, much more unusual. Oh, one other thing that I like to share is that the being who kept channeling through my client to me, he made the point once, and I've never forgotten it, that one of the reasons that so many of these extraterrestrial beings are really interested in Earth and humanity is because Earth has more species and subspecies and subspecies of animals and all kinds of life than than life on all of the other planets in the whole cosmos combined.
Wow.
This one planet, we have more species of everything. And when you think about it, we do, more species of bugs, of trees, of leaves, of plants, of flowers, of fish, of humans, of mammals. I mean, we are an incredibly diverse planet in terms of life. That's one of the reasons. Then other reasons have been given too that um, through DNA work, uh, many of the beings out there have had a hand in creating us the way that we are and making tweaks. When we've had evolutionary jumps from very early pre-humans and so forth, and right along and at various times, uh, given different aspects to our DNA. And so in that sense, we might all be hybrids, and we haven't known that. I think that's very, very possible.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, I think if that is true, it's kind of a stretch, to take that one on. But I think it's uh, kind of a compliment in a way. I mean, and there particularly are some people who have more of the abilities that some of those beings have, more psychic abilities, paranormal abilities. Probably we all have some of that. Some people have a lot more of it. Some people are really very proficient in telepathic communication, and some, don't do that ever at all, or even believe in it. I mean, we have a lot of variety here too. And then I think with humans that it so often happens that at least I have met so many people through this work who do have special abilities, but they don't want to share with other people that they have those abilities because people will say, "Oh, you're nuts," or "You're just making that up," or "Oh, that's just your ego," or I mean, there's so many ways to shoot people down when they try to share who they really, really are.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that I am just so impressed with, is that there are so many people who want somebody to talk to about these things. Not only about extraterrestrial experiences, but about a lot of the spiritual experiences they've had. Somehow, like for instance, just as an example, suddenly seeing their deceased grandmother right there by their bedside, or getting messages from them. I had that happen to me in 1968 with my very favorite aunt, who had died 2.5 years earlier. She just came and sat right there in my living room and stayed for several minutes. Just as clear looking, just as physical as anybody could possibly look. And I had never heard of such a thing before that. And yet it happened. And I kept saying to myself during those few minutes, wow, I am really seeing her. I mean, she's really here. This isn't just a figment of my imagination. She's really, really here, isn't she? And I would say, yes. I don't think I talked to her. I don't think she talked to me. But boy, that was just a blasting open experience, and a good experience. And I'm so grateful for that having happened, because it really opened me up to awareness of other dimensions. I'm other possibilities. I'm really grateful that that happened. Thank you again,
Wow.
Peg.
Well, thank you for visiting with us, and for sharing everything that you have. I truly do appreciate it very much, and I'm sure that the folks tuning in also will appreciate that.
Well, I wish you both well, and all of your listeners and viewers. I'm wishing you a very good new year, and even with a lot of ugly stuff going on in the world, hopefully all of this coming out will mean that we can do better. We can improve things. So I wish that for everybody.
Well, thank you so much. Absolutely agree to that. And it's been fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you too.
Reverend Stu.
Wow. Okay. All I can say is wow at this point. That was like an alien download for me. I'm overwhelmed with information.
I am too. And there was, I got to say a couple of things here. I said one thing during our conversation, and it was really weird. I was eating lunch and had that thought that I had already said, so I'm not going to restate it. But there was a good moment in when Barbra was talking, especially in the beginning, in the middle. I was literally thinking of questions that weren't on our outline, as it were, and as I was thinking of them, she was answering. It was just the most mind-boggling thing that I would think about, like raising my hand to interrupt and interject a question, and then she would just continue to talk and answer the question that I was going to ask. I don't know what to make of that.
That's very interesting. She was just in the flow, and it was all really interesting information. I was grateful that she kept going that way.
Yeah.
Now, Mike, I hope I didn't seem a bit impertinent or rude with some of those questions, but I introduced it by saying I'm going to play devil's advocate on some of those questions. So I wanted to bring a bit of balance, and I know that certainly some of my friends are going to be thinking those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that any questions were inappropriate or rude or taken the wrong way at all. But I do appreciate the questions that you were asking as well, because this is it's a farther along, it's a more advanced part of this conversation overall, which is why we sort of led up to it for whatever it was, 26 different episodes over 50 hours, right, to get to this point. But I'm really starting to, I don't know if I want to say this out loud, but I'm really starting to personally think that I am understanding what this truly is all about.
Wow. Yeah, it's very big. I was half expecting you to jump in with an on-the-fly disclaimer about not necessarily asking to catch a ride on a crop circle formation. You might want to think twice about that.
Oh, I was just in the moment and sort of letting that sort of go through. And it seems like different folks have different perspectives on it. But I mean, a lot of the stuff that she said was very interesting in terms of like the initial fear or trauma that we might perceive the situation to be, and then to learn sort of after the fact that it was not a bad thing per se, or you know, I'm wrestling with some stuff. Absolutely, I am. We've had conversations with different people. Most notably, that comes to mind is Reverend David Perry, who was talking about like the ritual aspect of some of these abductions and how they're not necessarily all our friends. And I'm open to that idea as well. But from our human perspective, we can only think about things in the way that we were sort of brought up or trained to think about them. But if we truly do have, and we do have, intelligences that are non-human, that are from elsewhere, they're likely not to have the same structure, society structure, or belief system that we do. So this is definitely a turning point in this channel's conversation, and I want to continue down this road and avenue and explore it more with other folks along that same line.
Definitely, and I might be interested to have a more detailed discussion with Reverend David William Parry on things like ceremonial magic and Enochian magic. And when we do, you'll see why I bring that up when this invocation type discussion happens. And by invocation, I mean asking entities to interact in your life.
Yeah, I'm definitely having a new perspective here, live, as it were. But that was one of the things too that I was thinking about when I was eating my lunch. Is like I starting to get the idea that I'm really understanding personally what this is all about, and it also, for me, makes sense why. And I mentioned it before. Why people aren't getting that official disclosure that they're wanting is because whoever would do that knows what we're discovering, or what I'm epiphany, whatever the word is, right? That's happening right now, and they, for whatever reason, don't want that to happen.
Oh, it's super tricky because it's like giving the answers to a test. So if we're trying to have a compartmentalized, separate experience where we learn things that we couldn't learn while we're integrated as part of the whole, then you don't necessarily want someone saying, "Hey, did you realize you're in a simulation?" Because that could spoil the whole experience. So there's that layer too.
Interesting. So that in a way is a non-sinister look at what some people might think is sinister.
That's right.
Interesting.
Because apparently the so-called dark side deliberately creating obstacles and trouble for us so we can have these experiences. Now, I say to my daughters, if there's no evil villain in the show just stops. Well, everyone lived happily ever after. Goodbye. That's that 5 seconds of show right there, and nothing happens.
Wow. Yeah. I never thought of it that way.
So listen, I better add my own disclaimer now. I'm not advocating for any dark side or nefarious activities or sinister forces. Definitely not advocating for that. But I'm just saying that that is part of the layer of what we're experiencing here, from my understanding. And also that helps me to be forgiving, because I realize that we're all actually one, and we're playing roles for each other, creating challenges so we can have this experience. Like if we did an acting improvisation, I said to you, Mike, you're the evil, sinister character. Here's your here's your white cat to stroke while you control everything behind the scenes. And let's go for it. Let's improvise the whole thing. And I won't hate you for that. I'll probably admire. That was well done. It was well played.
Yeah. It's been said life is a game before, and maybe it is.
Well, this "Are we living in a simulation" keeps coming up, as you've seen. Elon Musk's been talking about it. A bunch of Theoretical physicists have been talking about it. There's some very compelling evidence to suggest that we do live in a simulation.
We think that this is all that we are, but yet we're so much more than that. And pew.
Well, I've heard Bob Lazar mention that the entities refer to our bodies as containers. And I mentioned with the discussion we had with Timothy Hogan, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, that if you're coming from a place of all-knowing, like there's nothing that you don't know, the only experience that's left to have is to experience what it's like to not know. And I think that's what we're doing here.
I think that you're right on the nose with that one. That's, yeah.
And also, you've got Jesus and other masters coming forward and saying, hey, listen, you've forgotten who you are. I know it's going to be very shocking when I start doing miracles in front of you and walking on the water, but it's to show you that you've forgotten what your true abilities are.
Wow.
I know this whole thing seems strange, but the more pieces you have on the table, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, the picture starts emerging. It certainly has for me. And I'm not saying that I understand everything, Mike. I'm still working my way through this information, but each piece of the puzzle we get, like we got a bunch of pieces thrown on the table today, I've got to sit and put them, try and find out where they go. But a picture will emerge, and it's an informing one. And I'm grateful for this journey.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And in my statement earlier, I'm not trying to say like I know the everything and the answer either, but I feel like I'm getting a lot closer to it.
Now, gnosis is direct experiential knowledge. So there's a re-emergence of Gnostic philosophies and teaching because of the Nag Hammadi that was discovered in the 40s. So there's a lot of people online who are aware of Gnosticism. There's two main streams of Gnosticism. One's Hermetic, which is Egyptian, and the other one's Christian. The point I'm trying to make here is experiencing, experiencers. You have an experience, then you know. So you're not hearing something secondhand. You might initially. You might hear about it. I did with astral projection, for example. I heard from, I think, around about 5 different people firsthand that it was real. And it was that point that I obtained every book I could find on astral projection, and I was able to do it for myself. Direct experiential knowledge. I saw for myself, okay, this is real. And I might add briefly that that's quite scientific in nature, because for me it was repeatable. People told me about it, I read how to do it, and I did it. So I would assert that there's scientific validity in that.
Interesting, yeah. I mean, that is the scientific method, as it were, right? Test and repeat. Yeah.
So I applaud these experiences coming forward because, we just had it today where Barbra was saying, I requested that I participate and come along for the ride for crop circle creation. And I was like, whoa, hang on a second. I've definitely got a question for you on that. Now, what's the protocol? How did you ask for that? Now, I'm not planning on asking for the same thing, but I'm trying to correlate it with other information that I'm aware of.
Yeah, well, I did. I mean, she did. It sounded like she was already in the geographic area as well. But as we've said with some other stuff here before, don't just go out and try something, because you heard it here. Make sure you know what you're getting yourself into before you ask for something like that. So yeah, with that, just as a reminder, we do want to sort of focus our current season on, as much as possible, experiencers. And if you are out there who want to share your story, we have multiple options. If you're not comfortable being on video, we can do audio only as well, so you don't show your face, or if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. However, there's a qualifier to that too. If you're having an experience you want to talk about, this isn't necessarily the place for someone to share their experience before they've talked with someone like Barbra or Mary Rodwell, or the MUFON ERT or something like that, because you have to work through it. But if you've already gone through that process and you're open to sharing, please do reach out with us. Otherwise, this is not necessarily the best place for that, because it's the internet, right?
Very sensible statement, Mike. Thank you for adding that.
All right. So as always, thank you so very much for your likes and your comments and subscribes and shares. Please share everything with the world. If you're coming back, as a lot of people are, we're close to, at the time of this recording, close to 12,000 subscribers in less than a year. Thank you so very much for that. But share us with your friends and family as well, because that's why we're here, to propel this conversation all across the world.
Thank you. Much love to everyone out there.
Likewise.